Right, good evening. Welcome to the that's loud. Community Grant Panel meeting on the 8th of October 2025. I'm your chair, Councillor Sam Hawkins. We'll now start the meeting by doing a roll call. And do you want to do interests at the same time?
Thanks, Chair. So, before me, panel members, I see yourself, Councillor Sam Hawkins.
Yep, present and no declarations.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Councillor Sarah Jackson. Good evening, Sarah.
Good evening. Present. No declarations.
Thank you very much. Next on to Councillor John Loudon. Good evening, John.
Evening, Debbie. I'm present and I have no declarations. Thank you.
And last but not least, Councillor Simon Smith. Good evening, Simon.
Thank you. I'm enjoying this jovial entrance, but yes, I am present and I have nothing to declare.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I can confirm we are quorate.
Thank you. Agenda item 1, apologies. We've got apologies from Councillors Jess Bailey and Helen Parr. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest we've done. Agenda item 3, there are no members of the public. There are no matters of urgency for item 4, and there's no confidential exempt items for item 5. So agenda item 6, draft communities grant fund policy, and Sharon's going to take us through the draft policy with a presentation.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. I have a presentation for you to go through to pull out the key points from the new draft policy. So, as a background, we carried out a review of the previous funding, which included the Community Buildings Fund, Small Community Grant Fund, and the Action on Poverty Fund. Cabinet agreed in February this year to merge the leftover funds into one new grant scheme and agreed to the new funds would sit under the Assistant Director for Rev, Spends and Customer Services, and these would be administered by the Benefits and Financial Resilience team. There were discussions that the new scheme needed to provide for community buildings as well as groups, and our executive and strategic leadership teams also wanted to ensure that the fund meets the needs of the council plan priorities and that we allow for that wide range of community groups to apply for the funding. So that's been reflected into the draft policy. The leader announced at the voluntary thank you event that we would have the new grant fund established and that the fund would be relaunched this year. And we have in total 204,000, which will be administered over this financial year and 26-27. But however, taking into account LGR, if there is any further funding found or any funds left from 25-26 or 26-27, we've allowed for those to be rolled forward to provide the funding for the 27-28 financial year. And so in designing the new scheme, I carried out some training with Devon Communities Together, and I've also done a lot of research looking at what we had available previously, speaking with internal teams, economic development and countryside and leisure, who all run grant schemes. And I've also spoken with other LAs around the country, Devon County Council, Devon Communities Together and the voluntary sector coordinator. So we started with our key principles and criteria document, which we shared with the voluntary sector and also discussed with yourselves during that consultative meeting in the summer to help design the draft policy. And members may remember that the points from that meeting, Debbie emailed out with feedback to be received by the 8th of August. I didn't receive any further feedback, so we've shaped the draft policy based on what we gained from that original meeting. And that a few points that hopefully you will notice that have been built into there, things like the Community Building Fund only being made available for those rural communities. And that applications should only be received by authorised representatives of the organisation, like the chair or the secretary or chief officer. There you go. Okay, so our proposed new scheme incorporates much of the criteria that I was able to locate from the grant funding schemes we ran in previous years. It continues to allow for the community buildings in rural areas and small community grants across the district. and we'll still continue to allow a wide range of community groups to apply for funding as long as it's linked to our council plan priorities. And we want to make it as easy as possible for community groups to apply, as that was an area the voluntary sector have fed back to us is a big issue for them on a number of occasions. Of course, we have the 102,000 available for each year over the next 2 years. And we are proposing that for small community grants, we've allowed those awards of between 300 and 1,500. The voluntary sector have told us that that amount of 1,500 is not very high, and there's going to be a limit on what they can provide for that amount of funding. But although those amounts they might seem low, that is an increase on what was allowed previously under the Small Grants Fund, which was £500. So we have increased that. We've got the amounts for the community buildings between 500 and 10,000, which is an increase on the amount from the previous funding. And the draft policy proposes that we cap that amount of funding at the 50% of the total fund to ensure that there's enough funding left for those small groups. And we are working with Devon Communities together to make sure we won't be funding a duplication of services already available. Now, we don't know what that exact demand on the fund. We've been told that it's likely to be quite high, especially for the first 2 rounds, because there's not been much funding available. So it could be that, we could only be able to support 5 community buildings and 34 small community groups at the moment. So members hadn't commented on the amounts at that consultative meeting and didn't come back. So I just want to kind of make you aware that those amounts haven't changed. They're still in there, and we're going to make sure that we get that balance right, also of where the funding is administered and that it's equally shared across the whole of East Devon, not just our larger towns like Exmouth. So it's out in the rural community as well. Our new policies, while this is a draft policy, I want to make sure that we had in place a formal document to ensure we meet our governance requirements and our protections against fraud and the ability to recover the money. As we've learnt that over the last few years, that's really important to have within a policy. We also have legal and finance teams' inputs as well, and the requirements that we need to meet for them. And you'll notice that while legal and finance comments have been added to the report, for this meeting they will be looked at again for ELT, which I need to take to ELT before I can submit to Cabinet. So our main priority is getting the scheme up and running as soon as possible so we can start supporting the voluntary sector as quickly as possible, as we know the importance of the role they play in supporting East Devon residents. And going on the changes that have been made in regards to the funding, we've removed the match funding from the small community grants. There is match funding for amounts of over 3,000 for community buildings, but the voluntary sector told us that could still be a barrier for them. And again, that's something members didn't make any comment on from the consultative meeting or the follow-up email. So that again is just drawing your attention that those funding amounts haven't changed. We also didn't get any feedback about receiving applications from newly set up groups, so that's been left in as well. But that is something we'll be working with Devon Communities together with to make sure that project's viable and again not of duplication of what's already in place. And they can also be host organisations to hold funds for those unconstituted groups if it's required. And last of all, the funding for the carbon reduction and businesses won't be eligible as separate funding is currently available for those areas. So we are expecting a lot of applications, and that something again was mentioned to me today by the voluntary sector. We realise how busy members are. Your time's really precious, and we don't want that scheme to be we don't want it to become burdensome for you. So we've put into the policy that officers do the due diligence, sorry, get my words out, and score all the applications for those amounts below 3,000, and we'll then bring a summary report with the list of the recipients and then the amounts for members to agree. And then for the applications over 3,000, we will review and score all the applications and then bring the report that will include the officer's recommendations along with all the paperwork for that application to be looked at. And then that will be decided by the panel. And members can choose whether to approve, reject, or ask for the amendment to the full bid application at that point. And that was something we discussed during that consultative meeting as well. But if members would prefer, we can carry out the due diligence and scoring and bring all the paperwork for those applications which meet the criteria for you as a panel to decide. We'd just like to draw your attention to the timescales and the requirement for the meetings, especially if there are a lot of applications. It might be quite hard to go through all of those within the timescales. So we will be looking to book in those panel meetings as well as soon as we can, once we've decided on the windows, the grant application windows as well. So we're expecting the funding achieves positive outcomes. So we're going to be looking for organisations to confirm what their projects are going to achieve at the application stage. They will then feed into the reporting during or after the project's been completed. So we'll be looking at the benefits of the project, how many residents we've helped, how many community buildings have been maintained, helped stay open, and we've got our improvements to the lives of the residents in the area where the projects have been delivered. And as well as reporting on all of those, we're also going to be looking at reporting the geographical spread of where funding's been received, and there'll be follow-up work by the team to monitor those outcomes, and that will all feed into the annual report. So we are seeking your approval on the draft policy, especially the award amounts in section 2. Who can and can't apply in section 3 and 4, and the application process in section 6. We are proposing a further amendment to the policy, which isn't included in the paperwork. So it's by adding the following wording and an extra 1.6, which will say that the grant's intended for those organisations who do not hold relatively high surplus funds. And we'd just like to check with you that you're happy with that wording, as it's not in the draft policy, but we will add it in for ELT and Cabinet, and we'll make the assessment of that as part of the scoring criteria. And if members are happy with the proposed draft policy, that they will recommend that final draft to Cabinet. And then our next steps will be preparing and submitting the report to ELT ready for Cabinet. So hoping that can get to the 29th of October if there's not any major changes for short timescales. But we've been working with comms over the branding, if we can do some branding, and how we launch the scheme as well. And I've got to set the grant windows and the formal meetings for the panel, the community grant panel, to decide applications once we've had agreement from Cabinet. We've got the design of the application form, which I've started working on with Strata, and also the voluntary sector coordinator I've met with her, and we're doing some of that work together. And we'll also need to provide training to the team, and let's get that in place shortly. And hopefully, providing we can get everything completed in time and subject to cabinet approval, we'll look to go live hopefully around November to December. But that, of course, will depend on timelines of meetings and if there are any further changes needing to be made. And I think that's it. So thank you for listening and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Sharon. Obviously, we've seen version 1 in the summer and been able to comment and feedback onto that, which has helped, I think, finesse it. So is there any questions on, I guess, version 2? Sarah?
Yes, so obviously we've got a cap on organisations only being able to apply once in any 12-month period, but under the eligibility sort of framework, is there anything in there that prevents an organisation from applying where they haven't demonstrated that the first grant was used as we were expecting it to be? That a safeguard, if you will, so that we can ensure that a second grant isn't then awarded that, again, we don't see the output to.
We could look to add that in for sure, yeah, so put some wording in there, yeah.
That'd be good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I wonder if following on from that then whether as part of the due diligence it is just as the organisation name comes forward we can have a look at the history, if it doesn't already come up naturally when we put an organisation in, the history of grants received, just to get an idea of the health of them as a requester. It might be something that's already in a natural route of going through organisations anyway as they apply, but if it isn't, it might be worth just thinking about that, I think.
I think we can look to build that into our application process as well, because we'll be using our Granicus form, so that does show previous applications. But is that?
The thing I was just going to add to that was it might be worth some of the wording like, have you been known as another organisational name within the last 3 years or whatever we want to deem, because we might then catch organisations that have changed names but still the same legal entity, and would stop that going through the cracks as well.
Maybe do you want to sign in with your badge? Oh, on the left, that's it. Left-hand side. Over the speaker part. Down, bring your hand down. Try again.
From other organisations?
I think, well, it depends on what we have access to. I was imagining East Devon grants.
East Devon grants?
Because that's what we have access to check, I guess, easily.
Yeah, although we can ask them to provide in their application whether they've received any other grants and who from, if need be.
Ask that if they're getting money from elsewhere
Elsewhere.
for the same project.
Yes.
That's well
Yeah.
within our rights to say.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure we have when we ask for match funding. For
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
figures.
That's fine, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Loudon.
Thank you, Sharon. I have a number of things I want to say. The first is by way of an apology, and I suspect we're quite rude as members in, not the least, you say you didn't get any responses when you revised this, and I felt chastened. Quite right, quite right. Even if we respond saying thanks, I've got no comment. So apologies for that. It must be a bit galling sometimes to find you're just speaking to a vacuum. So talking of vacuums, you were talking earlier on about the anticipation of what will happen when we go live, and that we may get quite a few applications. And that's to be anticipated, isn't it? Because we've had a vacuum of 18 months, 2 years since we last went down the similar track on this. So that shouldn't catch us unaware, really. I have to say, just with a local bent, to sort of scroll through this, reading it, and then find my village hall sort of comes whacking off the page at me. That was interesting. But thank you. That was an interesting. That's the point that I think I may have made previously. You're asking about the funding levels. I have to say, I really don't know. I don't know what is the appropriate amount to be putting on offer. So I have to be guided by what, if you like, the sector, and those of you who look at the sector are suggesting. We can always, at some point, amend, can't we? This isn't set in stone. But if I look at £10,000 for a village hall, that's a sizable chunk for being half a project. So spending £20,000, that's quite meaty. So I think that feels comfortable to me, appropriate. 1,500, I have no idea. So I'm being honest there. Right. Looking at then the process side of all of this, we have to meet in person, don't we? Because we're agreeing to funding. Yeah, that was my. Because I was trying to think back in the past with the previous iteration of this group. We did meet online, and I can't remember whether that was over COVID or when it was. So I'll leave that hanging, and Sarah, Councillor Jackson may come in and help me. The last bit. So you're clearly wanting to go quickly on this, and I get that. Cabinet, the next cabinet is 29th of October. On Monday, we are agreeing the draft cabinet agenda. So I then looked to my colleagues in democratic services about whether they allow you to sort of push this under the radar into that process. I mean, obviously, the quicker we can get it into cabinet, the better. I'm not saying don't do it, but if we can, that would be great, because otherwise it's the 3rd of December, which then you lose a month, don't you? So if you're able to persuade Debbie and her colleagues on Monday, I'm sure that the leader and I will be looking at this, positively. And the very final point is that, can I suggest that, and forgive me if I'm telling my colleagues how to suck eggs, but can we have a recommendation in there that allows delegated authority to the relevant senior officer, whether it's yourself, whether it's Simon, I don't know where you pitch it, in conjunction with portfolio holder for finance, to make variations, because otherwise we're just going backwards and forwards, aren't we? So sorry if I'm telling you how to suck eggs.
John, should we regularise that with a proposal from this forum? Because obviously this forum's just recommending to Cabinet, so it might just form part of the recommendation to Cabinet, I think. Is the best way to do that.
Sorry, can I just come in,
Yeah,
Chair?
go on.
There is within the policy document delegated authority for that to come to myself in consultation with the Community Grants Panel to agree changes to the policy without needing to go back, or we could change that to the Chair only if it's entirely up to the Community Grants Panel. So we can amend that wording or leave it as it is. It's under section 16, policy note. Policy administration, hang on, sorry, there is delegated, scheme of delegation under section 9. The council is, the assistant director for Rev-Spends CSC retains delegated authority to make amendments to the policy in consultation. Oh, it is with the chair of the Community Grants Panel. If you're happy with that, we'll just make that clear in the recommendation that that's in the policy document.
I knew I was telling you how to do your job, Libby. And yes, I'd forgotten I'd read this. And I think having it as chair, I don't know, Sam, whether you still feel we need to include it in our recommendations, but I was just, I suppose, wanting to have avoidance of doubt by having it in the recommendation for Cabinet, so that nobody can say we didn't realise. So if we need a proposal, I'm happy to propose it here. Sarah, are you going to pick up on the...
Yeah, did you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, so the only thing was a query around whether we have to meet physically or whether we can do so online. And I only raised that because I think there's been some shared prosperity funding that was done through a panel that was meeting online relatively recently. So because I think Councillor Hayward was chairing that, because he's with his economy hat on. So I'd just be interested to know whether there's a parallel, whether there's a constitutional difference between that particular body and us. I have sent a message just to say how recently was that, because he chairs so many meetings, but he hasn't come back to me yet.
Yeah, I can never remember what happened during COVID and what didn't. If you're happy just to have a look, well, I think obviously we'll default to in person if we know that's legal, but if there's a way around it, it will save everybody time. Happy with that suggestion.
Sorry, when we get to that point when we're looking at applications, practically it might be good to be around a table together rather than in the chamber, because then actually we can then have those conversations that we need to. I imagine it's a more workshop style format rather than necessarily a formal affair. That feels like a more workable for me. If I was going to be, I'm not having done this before, I would imagine it would be far better to kind of say these are the applications we're looking at, and to be around a table rather than necessarily. There's just some thoughts anyway.
I guess my observation is that let's see what comes forward to then work out the best strategy, because it might be that we have a pre-workshop to then formally resolve the solution, because obviously it depends what comes forward as to how meaty they are, or because I suspect some will be fairly obvious one way or another.
And the question, the added wording going in about the reserves, was that going to be open-ended, as in, well, was that going to be a judgment call for decision makers to make, or were we planning on putting in a sliding scale or something like that?
Yeah, I think we'd leave that as a decision for members to make as part of those applications. We can. Well, we'd have officer recommendations, so it would, I suppose, depend on, we want it to be relative to the size of the organisation as well, because some might have significant funds and others may not have quite so much, so, exactly.
Councillor Jackson.
It was only around the applications to align with our council priorities, and I know that's not an exhaustive list, but I just wondered whether there ought to be something in there around carbon reduction, only because it makes up quite a part of our current priorities list. Appreciate that there has been other funding available for various different organisations for carbon reduction, and those sorts of funds don't go very far for some of the big capex type expenditure. But I don't know. I must have missed that.
Yeah. So in itself, it's exempt, but obviously, if there were aspects, I guess, of it that weren't covered elsewhere and were ancillary to a grant, it would still sit there. It's that difficult point, isn't it? Trying to get policy that covers everything while still remembering the entire world's grey.
Yeah, I think it's that the current funding around carbon reduction, I think that's come to an end. So at the moment it says because there's other funding available. I'm not sure that is available anymore, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Sorry, Chair. Can I just take that back as an action, because it was something we did clarify when we started work on this, that there was funding available, and they've got there's quite a bit of money sat within the carbon capital projects or revenue funds, but there is money set aside for the council, and that would have been within that envelope includes money for grants, which is why we've purposely excluded it from this, because there is access to funding. But I'll just take that action away, and if it's not, then it's something we can reflect back in or update the policy on.
I think it's an interesting point, because I think ultimately, one of our main objectives for doing this would be to make sure that organisations, community organisations, are able to be more sustainable, and obviously increasing green energy production is one way that an organisation can bring their costs down, and therefore helping them to survive or giving them a better chance to survive. So it would make sense to see if there is some provision, and if you, we'll find out anyway, won't we? So
it does say if where there's funding available, and obviously if those schemes aren't available, then technically they could come through this route, because we haven't got anything available. So I think we'll just check it. It might mean that we need to play with the words a bit on that to just clarify that. But I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think it might be that the current funding that was part of a scheme has come to an end, but other funding is due to come forward. So in fairness, like it might be that there are new pots imminent.
John.
A very minor point, and that's in 10.2. We talk about applications within 14 days of the council, appeals within 14, yes, for a review within 14 days of the council's decision. It's either 14 calendar days or 10 working days. We just need to clarify. My preference would be for working, but
I mean, obviously 10 working days will be the same as 14 days, but we can make it 14 working days or leave as is. Yeah.
it's like playing ping pong, isn't it? I'm assuming that you were trying to achieve a fortnight by saying that. It's just that if we end up with somebody, if we interpret it as 10 working days and someone thinks it's 14 working days, and we cut it off and we end up having a row with them, it's just
When we approve one on Christmas Eve, we've got the right number of days planned into it.
Your son will be very happy if he'd see you go on Christmas Eve.
Yeah. Day out, innit, for him? Right, so I think we're there. You've obviously, Sharon, you've got a couple of bits to go away with that I think you'll finalise before it gets to Cabinet. John, I kind of let you make a proposal and then I didn't bother seconding it or even following up on it, so apologies, but Sarah's come to my rescue. And obviously we're tweaking, that's with the wording tweaked around 10 business days instead of 14 days. I think that's the only amendment that we want at this point. Sharon, you've raised 1.7 being added about reserves, which I think we're happy with that suggestion. And obviously we've got the actual recommendation is the Community Grant Panel agree the draft policy for the Community Grant Fund, which is probably, taking into account the suggestions tonight, and that we recommend the final scheme to Cabinet. I've had it proposed, I've had it seconded. Sarah, are you correcting me?
Only if the proposer is happy around just the strengthening of the wording around second requests in the second year, and whether the first lot had been used properly.
He's nodding. I'll take that. If we can just take a quick vote then, all those in favour, please. That's unanimous, thank you. And that will bring our meeting to an end, and I'd like to thank everyone for taking part. Thank you.